I didn't know a single signature could erase years of lies and greed, but the day I signed that paper, their millions vanished like smoke in the wind. My name is Ethan Cole. For most of my life, I believed in loyalty, hard work, and the idea that family and business could mix, until I learned the hard way how dangerous trust can be. The person who taught me that lesson wasn't a stranger. It was someone who used to call me brother. That man was Marcus Hale. To the world, Marcus was the golden investor, sharp suits, a smile that could sell water to the ocean, and a reputation for making people rich. To me, he was more than that. We grew up together in the same neighborhood, struggling side by side. He knew what it felt like to eat dinner made of nothing but white bread and tap water. When he rose to the top, he pulled me into his empire, swearing we'd finally live the life we'd once only dreamed about. For a while, it seemed perfect. We built companies together, flipping real estate, trading stocks, and investing in startups. My role was always quieter, buried in the background, handling contracts, balancing numbers, making sure Marcus's risks didn't sink the ship. He was the face, I was the foundation. And he liked it that way. But something shifted. I started noticing numbers that didn't add up. Funds misplaced. Deals signed without my approval. Lavish parties paid for out of accounts that were supposed to be sealed for business. Whenever I asked, Marcus would brush it off with that same easy grin. Relax, Ethan. You worry too much. This is how the game is played. And maybe I wanted to believe him. After all, he was the friend who had once slept on my couch when he was broke, the man who toasted me as his partner for life when our first million came through. But late at night, as I pored over spreadsheets, I saw shadows behind the numbers. Money vanishing. Shell companies. Loans in my name. That's when I realized Marcus wasn't just cutting corners. He was building an empire on my trust, planning to make me the fall guy when it all came crashing down. Still, I stayed silent. For now. Because Marcus didn't know that the quiet partner was watching him, learning, preparing. He didn't know that one day, I'd sign one single paper, and the fortune he stole would evaporate before his eyes. And as I stared at his smiling face across the table that night, pretending to drink to another victory, one thought echoed in my mind. When the moment comes, Marcus, you won't even see it coming. It started with the little things. The kind of details you could almost excuse if you weren't paying close attention. Marcus began showing up late to meetings, reeking of whiskey and expensive cologne, but still charming enough to make investors laugh like nothing was wrong. He'd slap me on the back, call me the numbers guy, and then promise profits we hadn't even projected. At first, I thought it was just his confidence talking. Marcus always had a talent for spinning air into gold. But when those promises started showing up in contracts with my signature forged at the bottom, I knew something wasn't right. I confronted him once. Marcus, these numbers don't make sense. We can't guarantee those returns. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. That's why they believe us, Ethan. Because I don't talk like an accountant, I talk like a winner. Let me handle the showmanship. You just keep the books tidy. He said it like a joke, but the way his eyes hardened told me it wasn't one. Soon, I started noticing the imbalance in everything we built. Marcus drove a new Bentley every year. He flew private when we visited clients. Meanwhile, my salary, unchanged for 3 years, came through the same way it always did, neatly deposited but never extravagant. We're reinvesting, he told me. Trust me, the payoff will come. But the payoff seemed to only come for him. The emotional toll crept in quietly. I stopped sleeping well. Nights were spent staring at glowing spreadsheets, hunting for missing funds that slipped through cracks I hadn't created. I kept telling myself I was paranoid, that Marcus was my brother in all but blood, that maybe success just made people different. Yet the lies piled higher. I caught him telling investors that he had handled a deal I'd spent months securing. He brushed off my work in meetings, cracking jokes that made me seem uptight and replaceable. To everyone else, he was the genius. To me, he was slowly becoming unrecognizable. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the look in his eyes whenever he thought I wasn't watching. That flicker of calculation, like he was already playing a game I hadn't been invited to. One night, I found an invoice slipped into the wrong folder, millions transferred to a shell company I'd never heard of. When I asked Marcus about it, his grin froze for just a second too long. Then he laughed it off. "Ethan, you've got to stop digging so deep. Not every transaction is your business." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with a dread I couldn't shake. Because for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I never thought I'd whisper about Marcus. What if the man I trusted most has been setting me up all along? And the silence that followed that question was louder than any answer. The day everything shattered wasn't marked by fireworks or chaos. It came in the form of a thin, cream-colored envelope delivered to my desk. Inside was a notice from the bank. Accounts frozen. Loans overdue. Payments defaulted, all in my name. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I wasn't reckless. I never signed anything without reading it twice. But stapled to the notice was a copy of my signature, only, it wasn't mine. It was Marcus's work, sloppy enough for me to recognize the forgery, sharp enough to fool the bank. I called him immediately. My voice shook with a panic I couldn't contain. "Marcus, what the hell is this? Why is my name on loans I never approved?" There was a pause on the other end, the kind that stretches like a noose tightening. Then his voice came, smooth as always. "Ethan, you worry too much. These things are temporary. The market dips, the banks panic, it'll blow over." But it didn't blow over. Within days, debt collectors started calling me, not him. Lawsuits arrived with my name printed bold across the top. Meanwhile, Marcus was photographed at a gala, champagne in one hand and his arm wrapped around a model. He didn't look worried. He looked free. That's when it clicked, I wasn't just his partner. I was his shield. Every shady deal, every missing dollar, every forged contract, he'd tied to me. And when the empire finally crumbled, the world would point their fingers at Ethan Cole, the quiet numbers guy, while Marcus slipped away with millions. The weight of it crushed me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My apartment filled with unopened envelopes stamped urgent and final notice. My friends stopped calling, some whispering that maybe Marcus had always been the brains and I had just gotten greedy. Betrayal isn't just losing money. It's losing the ground beneath your feet, the belief that loyalty means something. I'd spent years defending Marcus, trusting him, building his dream brick by brick. And with one stroke of a pen, he had turned me into his scapegoat. One night, I sat in the dark, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the endless trail of fraud. My hands trembled over the keyboard as the truth hardened inside me. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me. He had destroyed me, or at least, that's what he thought. But in that collapse, something else sparked. Anger. Cold, steady anger that cut through the fog of despair. I closed the laptop slowly, breathing deep, my jaw tight enough to ache. Marcus believed he'd buried me under the rubble of his lies. He thought I was too weak, too loyal, too broken to fight back. He was wrong. Because if one forged signature could ruin my life, then one real signature could erase everything he stole. And he would never see it coming. For weeks, I lived in the shadows of my own life. The bills piled higher, the calls grew louder, and the whispers of my so-called friends cut deeper than I thought possible. I was a ghost in my own skin, haunted by Marcus's grin, the sound of his voice echoing in my head, reminding me how completely he had gutted me. But despair doesn't last forever. It rots into something else. The trigger came one gray morning when I dragged myself into a cafe just to escape the silence of my apartment. At the corner table, I overheard two men in tailored suits talking about Marcus. "Guy's a genius," one said. "Flipped that whole company overnight." I heard his partner's the one who messed it all up. I froze. His partner. They were talking about me. The second man laughed. Typical. Deadweight gets blamed, and Marcus comes out clean. He always does. They didn't even know my face, yet my name was being dragged through the dirt like I was some useless fool. And Marcus? He was untouchable. Still sipping champagne, still smiling for cameras, while I was left drowning. That was the moment the despair cracked, and something sharper pushed through. I walked out of that cafe with my fists clenched and a truth burning in my chest. Marcus had written my downfall, but I still held the pen for his. That night, I went back to the spreadsheets, the contracts, the emails. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look at them as chains. I looked at them as weapons. Every forged signature, every fake invoice, every hidden transfer, it was all evidence. A trail of breadcrumbs Marcus had arrogantly assumed no one would follow. I studied until dawn, my grief hardening into resolve. The Ethan who had once trusted Marcus blindly was gone. In his place was someone colder, sharper, someone who understood that justice wasn't given. It was taken. As the sun broke through my blinds, I stood by the window, watching the light creep over the city Marcus thought he owned. My reflection stared back at me, tired, hollow, but with a fire rekindling in my eyes. Marcus had stolen everything he thought mattered to me, my name, my money, my reputation. But he hadn't stolen my mind. And buried inside that mind was the one thing he feared most, the ability to outthink him. I whispered it to myself, so quietly it was almost a secret oath. "I'm done being your shield, Marcus. From now on, I'm the storm you never saw coming." And in that silence, I made my decision. I would fight back, not with fists, not with rage, but with the same weapon Marcus had used against me. Paper. Because one signature had destroyed my life, and another could destroy his, I learned fast that revenge isn't a single dramatic act, it's a series of surgical strikes stitched together with patience. After the awakening, I mapped Marcus like a chessboard, every piece, every weakness, every predictable move. If he thought he could hide behind lawyers and champagne, he hadn't met the quieter kind of storm. Step 1, Evidence. I dug through every file I could access, old emails, archived contracts, bank reconciliations. Where there were gaps, I found ways to make them speak. I hired a freelance forensic accountant with a grudge of his own, Lila Ramos, a woman who could read a ledger like a lie detector. She found what I knew was there: round-trip transfers, invoices that led to empty offices, and payments routed through 3 different countries. The paper trail was sloppy because Marcus had been arrogant. Arrogance leaves fingerprints. Step 2, Allies. I reached out to people Marcus had burned: an ex-assistant who'd been quietly shoved out of the company, a junior partner who'd been demoted after complaining, and a banker who'd finally had enough of creative transfers. Each one had a small piece of truth. Together, they formed a mosaic. I convinced a local investigative journalist to take a confidential look, someone who loved a takedown almost as much as I hated the man who'd betrayed me. Step 3, Traps. Marcus trusted patterns, grand entrances, public praise, the idea that he was untouchable. So I fed him a pattern. I created a fake startup pitch, an elegant shell with a glossy one-pager and a believable founder. I let the rumor leak, quietly, through a channel Marcus adored, that there was a lucrative acquisition on the table that only the inner circle knew about. Predictably, Marcus moved to front-run it: a private meeting, soft contracts, a signature here and a transfer there. Each time he reached for control, I nudged him toward the documents that would expose him. It wasn't brute force, it was coaxing him into his own undoing. Step 4, Legal Scaffolding. I didn't go to court with a scream. I built an airtight cage. Layla and I compiled forensic reports. The journalist agreed to hold the story until the legal pieces were in place. I arranged for a quiet lawyer to file preservation orders and subpoenas that would lock certain accounts and freeze assets the instant we presented the evidence. Timing was everything. Public exposure without legal pressure can be shrugged off. Legal pressure without public eyes lets a skilled liar spin until the trail grows cold. All the while, Marcus lived as if nothing was wrong. He posted photos, accepted awards, made reckless plans, all the while stepping onto the floor I had laid for him. He laughed louder at his parties, drank deeper, and showed new investors a face polished to perfection. 2 nights before the execution, I sat with Lila and the journalist in a dim conference room, the files spread like a map of his crimes. We'd rehearsed the sequence until each move felt inevitable. I closed the folder, slid the final document across the table, a single page that would trigger the subpoenas and the freezes, and felt the old, cold thrill. My hand hovered over my pen. Outside, in the distance, a limousine rolled up to Marcus's townhouse. The driver pressed the bell. Someone knocked at his door. I signed. It began quietly, the way storms always do, an email here, a frozen account there. But by noon the next day, Marcus's empire started to crumble in full view of the world. The first blow landed at his bank. His morning routine usually began with a transfer, millions shifted across borders to keep his shells afloat. This time, his login greeted him with a red banner, account frozen. He tried another. Same result. By the time he called his private banker, subpoenas had already arrived, locking everything down. The second blow came from the press. The journalist released her exposé, front-page headlines with Marcus's photo splashed beside the words, "Investor built fortune on fraud, partner left holding the debt." The story traced every forged signature, every hidden transfer, every theft. And for once, the truth had my name cleared. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I was the whistleblower. The third blow was public humiliation. That same afternoon, Marcus strode onto a stage at a luxury hotel ballroom, ready to announce another brilliant deal. Cameras flashed, investors applauded. But before he could open his mouth, the big screens behind him lit up, not with his presentation, but with the journalist's findings. His voice cracked as he tried to deny it, but the documents were projected larger than life. Contracts bearing my forged signature, accounts that bled into his private expenses, the very receipts of his betrayal. The audience turned from applause to gasps. Some stood up and walked out. Others snapped photos and posted them instantly. His empire wasn't just collapsing in silence, it was burning under the brightest spotlight. And then came the final blow, the law. 2 suited officers stepped into the ballroom, badges glinting under the chandeliers. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They simply approached Marcus as if they'd been waiting for this moment longer than he'd lived. One placed a hand on his shoulder, the other read his rights. The microphones caught every word. Marcus's face, once smug, untouchable, twisted into something I'd never seen, fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize the game is over, and you're not holding the winning hand. From the back of the ballroom, I watched it all unfold. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The world was finally seeing the truth. The same signature he'd used to destroy me was now the nail in his coffin. As they led him away, cameras flashing like lightning, I felt no pity. Only justice. Marcus Hale had built his kingdom on lies, using me as the foundation. But foundations don't break, they wait. And when the time is right, they bury what was built on them. That day, Marcus lost everything, his fortune, his reputation, his freedom. And I, silent, steady Ethan Cole, finally stood victorious, the storm he never saw coming. In the weeks after Marcus's fall, the noise was deafening. His name was plastered across every headline, his face replayed endlessly on news cycles, once the golden boy of Wall Street, now the cautionary tale of greed. Investors scrambled, lawsuits piled up, and the empire he'd built on lies collapsed into dust. But for me, the silence that followed was louder. For the first time in months, I could wake up without the weight of dread pressing against my chest. The calls stopped. The lawsuits vanished. My name, once dragged through the mud, was now cleared, spoken with respect. Reporters called me the man who exposed the fraud. To some, I was a survivor. To others, I was a hero. I didn't crave the spotlight, though. What I wanted was freedom. The freedom to walk down the street without shame. The freedom to know that Marcus Hale could never hurt me, or anyone else, again. I rebuilt slowly. Clients returned. Partnerships reopened. Even old friends reached back out, apologizing for doubting me. But I was not the same man they had left behind. Something inside me had changed. I was sharper now, less trusting, but stronger. My faith in Marcus had broken me, but the betrayal had also forged me into someone who would never again be anyone's shield. And Marcus? His consequences were permanent. His accounts drained, his assets seized, his name synonymous with fraud. The man who once laughed in penthouses now sat in a cell, trading Armani suits for prison greys. The man who had toasted me as partner for life now had only silence for company. Justice had been served, but more than that, poetic justice. Because Marcus thought signatures were weapons. He used one to ruin me, to forge my name and bury me under his crimes. But in the end, it was my signature, on one simple paper, that stripped him of everything he had stolen. One pen built his empire. One pen destroyed it. And as I walked away from the chaos, I knew the truth: revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes, it comes with the quiet stroke of ink across paper. And now I'll ask you, watching this story, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Have you ever felt that sting of being used, or left behind, or made the fool? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this tale of justice gave you chills, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and poetic payback. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud, it's written.